Hey, this is Dan Harris, host of the 10% Happier podcast. I'm here to tell you about a new series we're running this September on 10% Happier. The goal is to help you do your life better. The series is called Reset. It's all about hitting the reset button in many of the most crucial areas of your life. Each week, we'll tackle a topic like how to reset your nervous system, how to reset your relationships, how to reset your career. We're going to bring on top-notch scientists and world-class meditation teachers to give you deep insights and actionable advice. It's all delivered with our trademark blend of skepticism, humor, credibility, and practicality. 10% Happier is self-help for smart people. Come join the party.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 3.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I would be very happy to have you. I want to talk about what's happening in Mississippi. And I very, very, very much want you to pay attention here. Anywhere in the nation that you live, this is so notable and such a big deal, it genuinely should be a national headline. We now have out the standardized test scores in the nation for seniors graduating last year, and it's terrible. I mean, genuinely bad stuff. Kids in this country have gotten dumber since COVID lockdowns. They're worse in math, they're worse in reading, they're worse in reading comprehension. You know, it's one thing to be able to read words on a page. It's a completely separate thing to understand what those words mean. It is when you, one of the standardized test hallmarks, and you all remember because you've all had the standardized test, is you read a paragraph. You have to answer questions about what you read, reading comprehension. But to even begin the reading comprehension, you've got to be able to read. Reading accelerates everyone to a better life. I tell my kids all the time still, the more you read, the smarter you get. You're not just acquiring knowledge, but your brain works better and better and better. You get better and better at reading, you get better and better at math. The words on a page, being able to process them, elevates you out of poverty. And Mississippi is starting to elevate children out of poverty by making them all better readers. And it's not just Mississippi. Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee have embraced what Mississippi is doing. It's being referred to as the Mississippi Miracle. And Kelsey Piper is writing about this. And Kelsey Piper is not exactly a conservative. But listen to this. Consider the latest chapter of the Mississippi Miracle, which has seen the state climb from 49th in the country on fourth grade reading to 9th nationally. This rise has received coverage in publications ranging from the New York Times to the New York Post, and yet it still feels as if what's taking place in the Deep South still has been grossly undersold. First, it's not just Mississippi. Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee have adopted the same strategy, stemming the bleeding affecting states elsewhere and seen significant improvements. Second, many people who aren't too focused on education policy seem to think Mississippi has simply stopped underperforming, that they're now doing about as well as everyone else. That's not true at all. Mississippi has not just caught up to your state, they are now wildly outperforming your state. If you live where I do in Oakland, California, and you cannot afford private education, you should seriously consider moving to Mississippi for substantially better public schools. Black students are as likely to be basic or above average readers in Mississippi, where the median black household income was $37,900 in 2023, as in national top performer Massachusetts, where the median black household income was $67,000 in 2022. You got that? In fact, Maryland has now hired Mississippi's superintendent of education, who oversaw improvements in that state's test scores, and now implementing the same program in Maryland. Maryland is rising. Kelsey Piper again. In my home state of California, only 30% of public school fourth graders can read proficiently. Fully 41% of fourth graders cannot read at a basic level, which is to say they cannot really understand and interpret written text at all. Eighth graders look almost as bad. These numbers have been tumbling downhill in California and more widely across the U.S. for years now, and not just because of school closures during the pandemic. Nationwide, reading scores for fourth graders peaked back in 2015, and while the especially ugly 2022 outcomes were dismissed at first as COVID-19 outliers, scores have gone down since. The decline is worse for the kids who are already struggling. The test scores of the bottom 10% of students have dropped catastrophically. In Mississippi, they have been rising year over year. The state recovered from a brief decline during COVID and now surpassed its pre-COVID highs. Its fourth grade students outperform California's on average, even though our state is richer, more educated, and spends 50% more per pupil. The difference is most pronounced if you look at the most disadvantaged students. In California, only 28% of black fourth graders read at or above grade level. In Mississippi, it's 52% of black fourth graders read at or above basic level. Mississippi has not just raised the floor, it's raised the ceiling. The state is also one of the nation's best performers when you look at students who are not economically disadvantaged. There is very little more essential to a free society than universal literacy and adequate public education. It's a civil right and the foundation for absolutely everything else. Mississippi's success is exciting, but perhaps more exciting is that other states that have adopted Mississippi's playbook are getting the same results. Louisiana clawed its way from 49th to 32nd. Tennessee has made it to the top 25 for the first time. John White spent 9 years in the Louisiana Department of Education working on a suite of reforms that made Louisiana the fastest improving state in the country across reading, math, science, and high school graduation rates. The first thing he did was to caution that we don't actually know which of Louisiana's reform played a causal role. Nonetheless, there are some commonalities among what southern states are doing. John White named three things, the first of which sounds obvious in retrospect. The states adopted reading curricula backed by actual scientific research. This led them to adopting phonics-based early literacy programs and rejecting ones using the debunked whole language method that encouraged students to vaguely guess at words based on context instead of figuring them out sound by sound. Now, I got to segue from this because it's really important here. When I was a child, my parents will remember that my brain moved faster than my mouth. And I stuttered terribly as a kid. And I was not a good reader. And in first grade, I would be pulled away from class to a tutor who was in ninth grade and a lady named Miss Hannah, and they would help me with reading. And in second grade, I had to go into a remedial class for reading. In third grade, I could finally start reading out loud without stuttering. That's right. Your radio show host who talks for 3 hours a day with no script had a speech impediment when I was growing up, and it was in large part because my brain moved faster than my mouth, and I couldn't get the words out, and I would stutter. And I had a teacher in third grade who knew I liked Greek mythology, who between the tutoring program and the extra remedial program for reading and phonics, and Mrs. Bruskus, who made me write and write and write and write and write and then read out loud, always out loud to her. She would keep me during recess and read. And I remember, I can still quote for you the very first words I read out loud without stumbling over them. Single goddess, rage of Achilles, son of Theseus. Is it Theseus? Yeah, Theseus. Yep, single goddess, rage of Achilles. I will never forget that line. Terrible poetic version of the Iliad, by the way. I like the prose version better than the poetry version, but I could say that out loud without stumbling over it, that whole first paragraph of that poem of the Iliad, because Mrs. Bruskus made me write it and 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 read it out loud and read it out loud. And what she did was phonics. The sounds and the syllables, they all taught phonics. And I was always mesmerized when I would come home. My mom's best friend called her my Aunt Shirley. She was a kindergarten teacher, and she had been my kindergarten teacher before we moved to Dubai. And at some point in elementary school curriculum, it went from phonics to whole words. And you try to read sentences and guess the words based on context. And the data has always shown that phonics was better than whole word, but it became this weird dogmatic fight within teachers groups and teachers unions. And what's so interesting is that progressive teachers unions back in the day not only embraced the whole word method, but then invested in companies that were committed to the whole word method. And progressive teachers unions in progressive states have insisted that the teachers teach the whole word approach, where in southern schools where it's employment by will, they got more wedded to the research that showed phonics is actually the best way to teach kids to read, and they started doing phonics-based teaching. And guess what? Teaching phonics has exploded. Making schools, this is back to Kelsey Perry, this piece, making schools adopt the approach took more than a mere nudge. The southern surge states had tried earmarking funding, guidance to districts, and outright mandates. Those states all made a commitment to rigorous reviews of the highest quality published materials for students and some level of incentive for districts to implement the curriculum. So identifying the curricula that worked, buying them for schools, telling teachers to use it was part of the solution. But you've also got to get teachers to teach the curriculum. The second pillar is a scaled system of training teachers on the curriculum. Most teaching you get as a teacher is not training on the curriculum. Teachers undergo a lot of training, and it's mostly a waste of their time. That's not because teacher training is unimportant, but because we're training them in the wrong things. Billions of dollars are spent and wasted every year on professional management that is curriculum agnostic. A huge industry is invested in these workshops and trainings, argued a scathing 2020 article by David Steiner at Johns Hopkins. Given on average barely more than a single day of professional support to learn about the new materials, knowing that their students will face assessments that lack any integration with the curriculum, and subject to principals evaluations that don't assess curriculum use, teachers across the country are barely using these shiny objects. Old habits went out. So Mississippi in 2013 changed how it trained teachers, mandating elementary school teachers receive instruction in the science of reading. It sent coaches to low-performing classrooms to guide the teachers on the material. The third pillar is the least favorite but critical. Number 3 is clear accountability at the district level, the school level, the educator level, and the student and parent level. Accountability means standardized tests, requirements that students master reading before they advance to the 4th grade, and ranking of schools on performance. Accountability is no fun. When there aren't active political currents pushing for it, it tends to erode, but it's needed. Schools got distracted, John White said. At the same time, many schools were loosening the incentive structure that exists to focus on reading and math, knowledge, and skills. In Mississippi, a child who isn't capable of reading at the end of the third grade has to repeat the third grade. Alabama and Tennessee implemented it too. Research found that third grade retention doesn't harm students in non-academic ways and tends to help them academically, but it's upsetting for kids and families and educators. But it works. Y'all, Mississippi is now leading the nation in literacy for kids. Leading the nation. Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama have adopted the Mississippi methods, and their scores have skyrocketed. Louisiana now leads the nation in kids graduating from high school mastering math and reading and science. Louisiana, my home state, when I was in high school, I sat in a class my first day of high school in 10th grade in a public school in Louisiana and heard a kid raise his hand because he had never even heard of the word liberty. Liberty. Had never heard it, didn't know what it was, didn't know how to pronounce it. And now that same state is leading the nation because they decided to get rid of the dogma and focus on what actually worked. And it turns out Hooked on Phonics does work for these states and for these kids. And training the teachers how to teach it has made all the difference in the world. The southern poor states have more black kids reading at a level they need to read to be able to be literate for life than the elite, wealthy, progressive states that spend more on education. Think about that. The poor southern states that have less money to spend on education, the disadvantaged non-white students are actually better at reading than the wealthier black kids in richer states that haven't adopted the methods of the southern states. Yeah, you know, I got to just say again, please, you guys actually, if you want to really help us, growing YouTube, bizarrely, is one way to grow the radio show that people want to know, stations want to know, how big is your social media following? What are you on YouTube? How many people subscribe to the podcast? So doing all that stuff really helps us, and you can if you text the word ERICK, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. You can subscribe. I'll send you back the links. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast, the 4 Things to Know This Afternoon. All that stuff is available for you to subscribe to. Now, I got to tell you about Hillsdale College. They would love to offer you one of their classes for free. And I can't recommend enough a couple of them that I have dearly loved. One was on the Roman Republic. That one was great. The Constitutional Convention was great. The Federalist Papers great. I dearly loved the C.S. Lewis class. Now, here's what these classes are. They're 30-minute videos from Hillsdale's faculty, and depending on the class, depends on the number of those videos, how many episodes there are. So, for example, the one on capitalism has 7 30-minute videos. There's one on the Federalist Papers has 10 30-minute videos. You do them at your own pace. And it's just 30 minutes of your time with one of the great Hillsdale faculty members. They're very entertaining. They're stimulating. You actually learn useful knowledge. And it's not indoctrination. It's actually just real education, real history. You can get it on economics, or chemistry, on math, on literature, on philosophy, on politics, on history, so much. All you have to do is go to erickforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, erickforhillsdale.com. Sign up with Hillsdale College today. It doesn't cost you a penny to do. You take one of these classes, you get a certificate of completion when you're done. erickforhillsdale.com. Go sign up today. Hello there, it's Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number this Open Line Friday is 877-973-7425. Let's go to the phones to Jacksonville, Florida, listening on WOKV. Is Stephen. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Wow, this is an honor. Thank you, sir, for having me on.
Sure.
Well, I was listening to the show in transit, literally from a public elementary school where I was doing my job as a teacher educator and supervising some elementary school interns. Heard the part about the conspiracy theory framework you were using, which I thought was compelling, and then got back into the show when you were talking about my field, which is teacher education and literacy, and thought I would maybe encourage you to connect some dots based on the things you were actually talking about when it comes to the argument about science of reading and phonics versus the old paradigm of whole word type things.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is that the jury is really still out if we're looking at objectively at this stuff, and I am a fan of what you're doing here, and I've traced back my interest in shows like yours to Neil Bortz, for example. I was a great admirer of him, and I like what you're doing, the way you analyze things and the position and stance you take. And so I think that I would encourage the same kind of a perspective on that as well, that even with my appreciation for your perspective, your point of view, and I like to think I'm the similar kind of a thinker, there is more to the story than meets the eye, and to talk about either or, the science of reading and phonics versus what used to be called whole language is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
How so?
Well, the brain research stuff that we use, if we're being responsible teacher educators, tells us that when we reach a certain age, usually it's around age 10 or 11, the brain is changed and developed to a point where some of the things that we're talking about in teaching phonics become less likely to have the impact that we want when it comes to actually doing things in reading that we're aiming for in education. Namely, we can read for understanding, because we convert over from up to about grade 3 learning to read, and then we convert over from grade 4 up into reading to learn. And we have a window there where some of the foundational things that are language development and the basics of using language and breaking it down into its smallest components, that window starts to change and maybe even starts to go away for many of us, and we have to not ignore it, but we have to put it in its place and get on with the business of becoming literate overall, so that we're able to understand and bring our experience and more complicated way of looking at the world into what we do when we try to read. So we have to shift, and to say either or could lead people in the wrong direction to think that pertains even to older kids, let's say in school, that we should still hammer on the phonics, and there may not be good evidence that works.
Well, so I see your point there in particular that, and it's interesting, the southern states that have embraced phonics, and thanks very much for the phone call there, that if you're not literate by third grade, if you're not capable of reading by the end of third grade, you've got to repeat third grade. Because you got to get it right, because you're right, and that actually is in the approach that these states have found that, and for those of you who don't understand Stephen's point here, is that you have to learn to read words, and then when you get into about fourth grade is when your brain is developed to the point where then you take those words and you read for knowledge. You're now processing what you're reading. You're not just putting words on a page. Each word has a meaning, and that meaning triggers your brain to digest information. But to put this in the larger context for you, so everybody has the history here. And by the way, I will admit I'm very biased on phonics, because having started out the whole word method and had all sorts of problems, and then using phonics, I think the data does speak for itself. And people who want to be dismissive of the approach now, because you've got to understand the entirety of American universities teaching how to teach teachers how to read and stuff. It's all a lot of whole word stuff, and it became very controversial. Phonics, just to put this in the grand scheme of things, phonics goes back to the 16th century. That's right. Phonics, the history of reading in the English language, goes back to 1690. And the New England Primer. how to teach people in this country how to read from the 1690s until the 1800s. And in the 1800s, Horace Mann, who was a politician, by the way, and an advocate for literacy, embraced the idea of sounding out word letters by letters, because he was worried that if you do this, doing phonics, sounding out letter by letter, that you could detach from the word's meaning. So Horace Mann embraced what became the whole language approach in the 1800s. He was very, very prominent. Now, interestingly enough, literacy rates began to decline in every single school that embraced Horace Mann's approach. Literacy went down. In the 1950s, a very famous book came out, Why Johnny Can't Read. I remember having to read this book for a time. I thought about being an educator and had to read this book, Why Johnny Can't Read. It was a 1955 book, and it became this explosive debate in the reading wars. And literally, you do have to understand this, that there was an entire educator economics involved with teachers' unions that were advancing the idea of the whole word approach. I mean, all the major English language materials, all the teachers were being taught, and the teachers' unions didn't want to change. And in every single school, and this is where I think the debate ends for me on this. In every single school system in the United States that dropped whole word reading for phonics in K through 3, every single school system in the country that has embraced phonics based on the same standardized tests everybody uses, the kids who learn phonics outperform the kids who learn whole word. The poor black kids do better. The rich white kids do better. Every demographic does better. Mississippi started abandoning not just the whole word approach, but reteaching teachers to train their students on phonics. And when Mississippi did this, the results speak for themselves. Mississippi went from second to last place to fifth place in the nation. Louisiana, that embraced Mississippi's model, and now leads the nation. Tennessee and Alabama are skyrocketing in literacy, and every single one of them, the thing they have in common is they abandoned the Horace Mann whole word approach, and they went back to the 16th century or the 17th century phonics approach. And I think the results there speak for themselves. Yeah, Stephen's absolutely right. When you get past third grade, the approach to reading has to change, because you're not reading to learn to read. You're reading to learn comprehension, and you're reading to learn knowledge. But in K through 3, phonics has a greater, the data shows phonics gets more kids reading by third grade than the whole word approach. So then when they get into fourth grade, they train their skills from sounding out the words to understanding what the words mean and acquiring the knowledge that the words give. The data at this point, I don't think it's political. I think the data is very straightforward. It's very straightforward. Let me go back to the phones here. Steve, you're going to be up next. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Eric. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Really enjoy your show. I just wanted to say I've got 4 children. I'm 67 years old. 2 of the children were raised under phonics. 2 of the children were raised under word recognition. The 2 that are raised under phonics read all the time. I'm an excellent reader.
Oh, wait. Yeah, Steve, you broke up on me there right as you were saying then what the results were with phonics.
Okay, the 2 that raised under phonics, they read all the time and understand what they're reading, and excellent readers. The other 2, even now, struggle with reading comprehension. They're anywhere from age 30 to 45.
Now, Steve,
so
we have to weed out.
Made a big difference.
Well, hang on now. We got to weed out the key variable here. Did your children have Tylenol? I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I mean, just making sure that the whole word readers aren't Tylenol Americans. We got to make sure here. Yeah. Okay. So now yes. I just no, seriously though. But to your point, yeah. I mean, my kids are to some degree in the same situation. We moved them from a school that was doing whole word and moved them to a school that was doing phonics, and the transition to being prolific readers who actually can read and enjoy reading and the other thing too, Steve, is that when my kids learned complicated words, having learned phonics, they could sound out the word and it's that word, as opposed to the whole word approach. Yeah, which was always kind of weird.
Yes. And when they, even now, when they come across a word they don't know, they can sound it out, and their spelling is much, much better than the other two.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I hope they're not listening, Steve.
I believe in phonics. I think it's the right way to go.
Amen. Thank you very much for calling. Joe in Germantown, Ohio, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just wanted to give you a little background. In third grade, I was failing reading. I was in a Catholic school. They were teaching whole word. I had to spend summer school learning phonics. After that summer school, I could read.
Wow.
Yeah, I read everything about everything anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are things I read that I don't understand. I've got to look up words and say exactly what does that mean, but I can sound it out. I know what the word is. It was night and day.
Right.
And this is what we need to teach our kids. How to make the letters make sounds.
Right.
Once they know that, they can figure it out. They can go to a dictionary if they don't understand a word, and they can say, okay, this is what this word means. You know, like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's sounding those out there. Or, take one of my favorite words of all time, automatopoeia. Do you know what an automatopoeia is? If you encounter that word and you are into whole words, you are never going to figure out what automatopoeia is. If you learn phonics, you can pronounce onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word written to sound like the sound it makes. Chirp, roar, meow, oink, sizzle, bam, crash, pow. Those are all onomatopoeias. I love that word because I love to say the word onomatopoeia. And it's also a word that if you stumble across it, you're like, what is that word? Claude, you're going to be the last caller today, this Friday. How are you?
Oh, that's great. What I wanted to part, my mother was raised, born in Choctaw, Oklahoma. We moved to Chicago. Then we moved to this integrated town called Robbins, Illinois. My mother taught my sister how to read at 4 years old. The neighbor would read, friend was reading at 4 years old. Most of the people were teaching their kids to read. I was writing cursive when I was 2 or 3, not knowing what I was writing. And my mother dropped out of high school. Education was very important to her. My father could do the Rubik's Cube. He didn't finish high school. But anyway, the point was we listened to the radio, and we had books all over the place, and we listened to the radio, but reading was an extension of the theater of the mind. Mm-hmm. And when she got to school, the teacher jumped all over her for teaching my sister to read because they were writing, this is boring. When they were reading Dick and Jane, they could write and make sentences. And if my mother could do without even finishing high school, the question is, and they were using phonics, but they told, no, because they said, don't do that because they would get bored and they might act out. And so, we would too, and it was a wonderful town. It was integrated, and everything like that. But we didn't know that we couldn't do it being parents, and it was in 1951 and 1952.
Huh. Yeah, look, I got to tell you, Claude, the data is there. And I mean, in these southern states, in the black community, thanks very much for the phone call. The black students who learn phonics outperform black students who learn whole word. And it goes beyond socioeconomic background. And it literacy elevates kids to a higher level of existence. A child who graduates from high school who is a proficient reader from a poor family is far more likely to get a job than go to jail. A child who graduates from high school being unable to read is far more likely to go to jail than go to college or get a job. You want to keep kids out of jail when they get old, you teach them to read at an early age, and they become productive members of society. This is not rocket science, but the data is overwhelmingly that you teach kids in K through third grade phonics, teach the teachers how to teach the phonics. You're going to have a whole lot more productive citizens later and a whole lot fewer kids going to jail when they get out of high school. It's a no-brainer. Everybody should be doing it, and it's the teachers' unions in progressive states that are blocking the effort to transition because they've invested too much in too many financially lucrative businesses that produce and sell whole word materials. Well, we have here at the end of the day some good news. Core inflation was a little changed in August, according to the Federal Reserve's primary forecasting tool. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index posted a 0.3% gain for the month, putting the annual inflation rate at 2.7%. Excluding food and energy, it was 2.9%, which is on the nose, what was predicted. So the markets are happy. You should be happy. It's still higher than the Fed wants, but slowing, and there are some economic worries on the horizon. Well, I need to tell you about the secret war on cash. Swiss America has been sounding the alarm on this. It's an assault on your freedom to use your cash as the government tries to steer you towards plastic because they can better monitor it and control it. This goes for crypto as well. You got to be careful. Let Swiss America educate you about the secret war on cash. So I get the hiccups here at the end. 8779. No, that's my phone number, 800-289-2646. If you want to get the all-out war on cash report, 800-289-2646. Call them and tell them Eric sent you. They'll send you the report. You can get it completely for free. You can text my name, Eric, to 800-289-2646. You can also go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric, SwissAmerica.com/ERICK. Trying to pause. I got the hiccups at the end of the show. SwissAmerica.com/Eric, 800-289-2646. Just text Eric. Message and data rates may apply. I got to go drink some water upside down.
Hey, this is Dan Harris, host of the 10% Happier podcast. I'm here to tell you about a new series we're running this September on 10% Happier. The goal is to help you do your life better. The series is called Reset. It's all about hitting the reset button in many of the most crucial areas of your life. Each week, we'll tackle a topic like how to reset your nervous system, how to reset your relationships, how to reset your career. We're going to bring on top-notch scientists and world-class meditation teachers to give you deep insights and actionable advice. It's all delivered with our trademark blend of skepticism, humor, credibility, and practicality. 10% Happier is self-help for smart people. Come join the party.